Northern California. The year is 1981. Hidden among the pine forests and rugged mountains of the Sierra Nevada sits the tiny town of Keddie. A quiet, unincorporated community where only a few dozen people lived. It was the kind of place people went to escape the chaos of city life. Cabins, dirt roads, and silence, that was Keddie. But within that silence, something sinister was waiting. In one of those cabins, Cabin 28, lived the Sharp family. Sue Sharp, a 36-year-old mother of 5, had recently moved her children from Connecticut to California in search of a fresh start. Life had not been easy for her. She was a single mother, trying to raise her kids with little money, but with plenty of determination. The Sharp children were like any other: Tina, 12 years old, shy and thoughtful. John, 15, a teenager finding his way. Sheila, 14, who often helped her mother with the younger ones. And the youngest, Greg, 5, and Rick, 10, full of energy and innocence. For Sue, Keddie offered a chance at peace. But peace would not last long. The cabins were old. Their walls thin. Their wooden frames creaked in the cold nights. Locals described Keddie as isolated, even eerie at times. But no one could have imagined the horror that would soon unfold inside Cabin 28. By the spring of 1981, the Sharp family had settled into their routine. Sue supported her family with social assistance and occasional odd jobs. The kids attended school nearby. They played, they argued, they dreamed, just like any other family. But there were whispers, even then. Some residents claimed outsiders would drift through the small community, strangers who didn't belong. Ex-convicts. Drifters. Men with violent pasts. In a town as small as Keddie, you noticed when new faces appeared. And sometimes, those faces noticed you. April 11, 1981. It was a Saturday night. The Sharp family was at home, unaware that this ordinary evening would become one of the most infamous nights in American true crime history. Inside Cabin 28, laughter echoed, the children played, but just outside, in the thick mountain darkness, someone was watching. Someone was waiting. Saturday, April 11, 1981, began like any other day in Keddie. The Sharp family went about their routines. That evening, the older children made plans with friends. 15-year-old John Sharp and his friend, Dana Wingate, had spent the day together. Dana, also 15, was considered a bit of a troubled teen. He had run-ins with the law, and his home life was unstable. But he and John were close, and that night, they were inseparable. At the same time, Sheila Sharp, John's sister, was staying overnight with a friend in a nearby cabin. That decision would unknowingly save her life. Back at Cabin 28, Sue was at home with her younger children, Rick, Greg, and 12-year-old Tina. A neighbor's child, Justin Smart, was also spending the night with them. The cabin was filled with the sounds of children, laughter, games, and the hum of a Saturday evening. Outside, the Sierra Nevada forest sank into darkness. And in that darkness, danger was moving closer. By 10 p.m., the younger children had settled into their rooms. Tina was said to have stayed up later, while Sue waited for John and Dana to return. Around midnight, the two boys finally made it back to Cabin 28. They had been hitchhiking and were dropped off near the house. From the outside, the cabin looked peaceful, quiet, lights glowing faintly through the windows. But somewhere in the shadows, the killers were already waiting. What happened inside Cabin 28 between midnight and the early morning hours has never been fully understood. Investigators believe that at least 2 assailants entered the home, possibly through the back door. They were armed with knives, a hammer, and possibly a BB gun. The motive was never made clear. What is certain is that the attackers showed no mercy. When John and Dana arrived home, they were ambushed. Evidence suggests they fought back, furniture was overturned, blood was spattered across walls and floors. John was bound by electrical cords. Dana suffered skull fractures and was strangled. Sue was discovered in the living room, partially gagged with her own underwear, secured by medical tape. She had been beaten and stabbed repeatedly. Her body showed signs of overkill, suggesting the attack was fueled by rage or sadism. John and Dana were found nearby, brutally beaten with a hammer, stabbed, and tied with tape and wire. The living room had become a scene of unspeakable horror. And yet, in the chaos, 3 children, Rick, Greg, and their friend Justin, slept in a bedroom just feet away, unharmed. Whether the killers spared them intentionally or never realized they were there has never been answered. But 12-year-old Tina was gone. Her bed was empty. She had been abducted into the night, vanishing without a trace. The killers had disappeared into the woods, leaving behind a cabin soaked in blood, bodies broken, and a silence that would never again feel safe. No one in Keddie heard the screams. No one saw the shadows slip away. And by dawn, Cabin 28 was no longer just another rustic home in the mountains. It had become a tomb. Sunday morning, April 12, 1981. Easter Sunday. 14-year-old Sheila Sharp, who had spent the night with a friend at a neighboring cabin, was walking home. The sun was up, birds chirped, and the air carried the stillness of the Sierra Nevada woods. Sheila approached Cabin 28 expecting to find her family inside, her mother, her brothers, her sister Tina. But nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to see. Sheila opened the front door. What greeted her wasn't the warmth of her family, but a nightmare beyond comprehension. Inside the living room, her mother Sue lay lifeless, sprawled across the floor, gagged and bound with tape. Beside her, the bodies of her brother John and his friend Dana. Their faces were battered, their bodies mutilated. Blood was everywhere, splattered on the walls, pooled on the floor, smeared across furniture. The violence was unlike anything the small town of Keddie had ever seen. Sheila froze in shock, her mind unable to process the horror. Panicked, Sheila ran to the neighbors, screaming for help. Law enforcement was called. But by the time deputies arrived at Cabin 28, the crime scene was already disturbed. Neighbors had entered, trying to check if anyone else had survived. What they found would haunt them for decades. In the bedroom, they discovered 3 young boys, 10-year-old Rick, 5-year-old Greg, and their friend Justin. They were alive, somehow untouched by the killers, sleeping through the carnage that had unfolded only feet away. But one child was missing. 12-year-old Tina Sharp was nowhere to be found. Her bed was empty. Her shoes were gone. Investigators knew immediately, she had been taken. The brutality of the murders and Tina's disappearance deepened the mystery. Why had the killers spared the 3 boys, but abducted Tina? Deputies examined the cabin. The brutality shocked even seasoned investigators. Sue had been beaten with a hammer and stabbed multiple times. John had deep knife wounds and blunt force trauma. Dana's injuries included strangulation with an electrical cord. The weapons, hammer, knives, and even a bent steak knife, appeared to come from both inside and outside the cabin. Blood was smeared on the walls, as though the killers had left behind a message no one could understand. The level of violence suggested one thing: rage. But against who? And why? As word spread through the tiny community, fear swept across Keddie. Parents kept their children close. Neighbors looked at one another with suspicion. Because whoever had done this could still be out there. And they were not finished. Tina Sharp was still missing. The murders inside Cabin 28 stunned law enforcement. Even hardened investigators admitted they had never seen such brutality. 3 lives had been taken. A young girl was missing. And an entire town was paralyzed with fear. But from the very beginning, the investigation was flawed. Plumas County Sheriff's deputies mishandled evidence. The crime scene had been contaminated by neighbors entering the cabin before police arrived. Fingerprints were smudged, potential DNA destroyed. Even worse, certain items were never properly catalogued. A bloody knife found outside the cabin. A hammer that didn't belong to the Sharps. Clues that might have solved the murders slipped through the cracks. For the Sharp family, and for Keddie, justice was already slipping away. As investigators searched for suspects, one name rose to the surface: Marty Smart, a local man who lived just steps away from Cabin 28. His own stepson, Justin, had been one of the boys sleeping unharmed in the back bedroom that night. Marty had a reputation for violence. He was known to be abusive to his wife, Marilyn. And in later interviews, Marilyn claimed Marty hated Sue Sharp because she had advised her to leave him. Even stranger, Marty's friend, known only as Bo, was an ex-convict with ties to organized crime. Both men were in Keddie that night. Both were questioned. Both denied involvement. And then, they vanished from the investigation. Years later, disturbing details surfaced. Marty allegedly confessed to a therapist, saying he had killed Sue and Tina. That confession was never properly investigated at the time. Why? Some believe local law enforcement deliberately ignored evidence, either out of incompetence, or to protect someone they knew. The truth remains buried in silence. 3 years after the murders, in 1984, hunters stumbled upon human remains in a remote area of Butte County, about 100 miles from Keddie. The remains were identified as Tina Sharp. She had been taken from the cabin the night of the murders, only to be killed and discarded in the wilderness. The discovery brought heartbreak, but little closure. The killers had stolen not only lives, but justice. Decades have passed. Cabin 28 was eventually torn down in 2004, its walls unable to contain the darkness that had soaked into them. But the murders remain unsolved. Over the years, new investigators have re-examined the evidence. Some believe Marty Smart and his accomplice were indeed responsible. Others think the true killers have never been revealed. But one fact remains undeniable: the Keddie murders are among the most brutal and haunting unsolved crimes in American history. And as long as the case remains open, the shadows of Cabin 28 continue to whisper, reminding us that evil can hide anywhere. Even in the quietest of towns.